All right, so what happens when you take three of the sharpest, self-declared sharpest minds in infrastructure and security, and you ask them what actually matters right now in the industry? Well, hey, guess what? That is what we're here for at our HashiCorp Ambassador Roundtable discussion. We've got some of our most seasoned community experts here. They're going to answer some great questions within the cloud ecosystem, right? So these are the folks that have lived through all of the day two realities, even though things take way more than 2 days. I keep saying that, but we never change the messaging of security, infrastructure, and automation, and they've come back from that journey with opinions. Now, we're going to talk some big picture stuff today, big state, modularity, how Vault integrated should your app be. Then we're going to dig into some new announcements and things. You know, if there's nothing like light discussion, then talking about post-quantum encryption and breaking cryptography forever, but it'll be great. And if we have time, we will also do some hot takes, stuff like HashiCorp and IBM, AI, more AI, some other AI. Ned really liked AI. Pretty much everything that PR and HR were like, maybe let's watch it, but these guys love getting me into trouble. So let's get into it. First up, please add to the discussion if you can, but when you do not be a troll. Here are some community guidelines. If that is confusing to you, please go and check those out. Trolling is only, that privilege belongs to 3 of the people on screen here that are not me, and that is only doing it to me. And with that, let's go ahead and get into the guest intros. So if you all will, please introduce yourselves. Lachie first.
Oh, God, you got me in first. I was like, yeah, am I going to have to? Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Cole, and always nice to be with Ned and Elif. Always take the opportunity to talk everything that's going on in the Hashiverse. My name's Lachie White. I'm the CTO at a company called Lab3. I've been an ambassador for a long time now and love everything Terraform, Vault, and Waypoint, which I'll touch on a bit later as well. That's me. I'll tag in Elif.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. It's amazing to be able to catch up with amazing fellow ambassadors. And of course, Cole, despite having me stay awake till midnight. Hello, everyone. I'm Elif. I'm a HashiCorp ambassador for quite a few years now. I'm very passionate about everything related to infrastructure as code, managing data with Vault. Despite the fact that I didn't work with Waypoint, I'm eager to learn from the experience now. Passing it to Ned.
All right, I guess I'm the last one. Hi, everybody. I'm Ned Bellavance. I'm very excited to be here with all these awesome people. You may know me from Ned in the Cloud, my YouTube channel, or the various ranting I do about Terraform and Vault across LinkedIn and sometimes Blue Sky. I've been using both of these products, especially Terraform and Anger, since 2017. And over that time, I formed some opinions, and I'm happy to share them today.
All right. Now some just for folks, why this is going to be an amazing just episode of Roundtable is not only because of the wonderful backgrounds you just heard from each of those, but it is because what they are going through right now. As Elif said, it is midnight for her because I didn't calculate time zone. She's coming off a debugging brain for Python and Terraform. Ned is just fresh back from a long, incredible trip in Orlando, doing all sorts of Disney things. And I made Lachie get up as usual at 7, and he's infused with coffee.
7.
So,
That's 7. It's not too bad this time. You were kind.
It's not too bad. So the question isn't what could go wrong. The question is what could go right. Yeah,
or what will go wrong? No.
Everything could go wrong.
So agenda, pretty easy. Just 3 main sections we're going to do, one of which we will only get to if we have time. First up, some big picture topics, right? Some of the big, fun, meaty discussions that we're going to go through. 3 things inside of there. Then we'll get into announcements. And finally, like I said at the beginning, all extra time will go towards hot takes. So let's go into those big picture topics. We've got 3 we really wanted to get into. Elif, if you would, please kick us off because you were the first person to speak up when we were doing our prep meeting for this. So what is that topic?
Oh, one of the pain points I've encountered when working with Terraform was large state files, way too large. Imagine, I think some people watching this stream might understand or do understand my frustration because my mouse was actually hurt at the time. Imagine dependencies between state files. Imagine dependencies between environments. Imagine shared resources which were in 3 or 4 state files managed like crazy. And that got me to a very interesting question. And to be honest, I didn't find a straight answer to that one. What would be the proper strategy to organizing Terraform state files, considering, let's say, a medium-sized company at least, having the usual, let's say, development, staging, production environments, maybe something dedicated for platform teams, some sort of a playground. Thinking about, in terms of cloud, multi-region, high availability, multi-AZ, also taking into consideration maybe disaster recovery, how do we fall over? So a lot of questions. And that was hectic. So I still have no straight answer to that one. And it's a pain point. And it's not only my pain point. I've had discussions with peers and such issues of poor Terraform state management, it might become too cumbersome. Cumbersome to the point when it's easier to go and do ClickOps.
Ouch.
Yeah, that bad it was.
So that's incredible topic. Why don't we do this, Elif? Because you just introduced and set the whole stage there perfectly. Like the table's set, we are all ready to eat. Why don't we do this? How about we, if you wouldn't mind, Lachie and Ned, why don't you chime in and tell us what you think about that? And then we'll wrap back around, and Elif, you give us your big take on like what they've said, and then also your ideas to try to give us the full big picture. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So do we want to hear from Orlando Brain or 7 a.m. Coffee Brain first? Whoever starts speaking first, who will go with?
I'll start talking. I'm good at that.
I was just going to wait and see what happened. Could have been a minute and a half.
Yeah, I mean, these are all definitely problems that I've seen companies encounter. And when I'm delivering trainings, it's something that I hear back from people who are living this day in, day out is, how many resources is too many in state to begin with? So what do I do about these big bloated state files? And then I know I need to break this thing up, but how do I draw the lines to break it up into these different state data instances? And then how do I actually go about doing that? What's the refactoring process? And I try to give helpful answers. And I think part of it, what's too big of a state data is really going to be if it starts impeding your ability to deploy effectively. That's when the state data has gotten too big. When a plan, when you can't iterate on your infrastructure in a reasonable amount of time because the plan is just taking too long, that's probably when you've hit whatever the reasonable limit is. And I've talked to people that have 10,000, 15,000 or more resources in state. And depending on the providers, that might work out in 10, 15 minutes to run a plan. Other providers, Azure, not going to throw anybody under the bus, but Azure.
Yeah, there you go.
You might be looking at an hour or more to run a plan. And that's frankly just too long. If you're doing trunk-based development and constantly trying to push new things, that's too long to wait. So what do? You have to start breaking up your state. And what I try to tell people is you should break it up by environment. Absolutely. So, your prod and your dev and your staging and your QA should all have their own instance of state data. They shouldn't commingle those, right? Then I would recommend doing it by line of business and who is responsible for different aspects of your infrastructure. So if you have a network team and an identity team and a database team, et cetera, then that's probably where it makes sense to draw the lines on the infrastructure. That's not going to eliminate everything. You still might end up with state that's way too big, but at least it gives you a starting point going forward. Okay, if it's networking team related and it's for the dev environment, I'm going to put it in this state data. In terms of breaking stuff apart, it's so hard because it's easy to move resources within state. We've got the moved block, no problem. But as far as I know, there's no real good native solution for migrating resources from one configuration to another. Really, the closest thing is use removed blocks in the source config and use import blocks in the target config, and just like hope.
Hope.
It should work, but it's not that easy. That's like my quickest answer to it. But Lachie, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
It's such a great topic, Elif, and I kind of really align to Ned. I think it's one of those things, and I'm like Ned. I've 10, 15,000 resources under management. I've done it with a company that had 7,000 workspaces, right? Like, so the scales are huge for some of these companies where this is happening. And what I find where people fall into a trap that then leads to this discussion is when they treat Terraform like all the other CI/CD types of tools, right? And the kind of key reason why that's such a mistake when it comes to this is that when you're typically talking about CI/CD for other elements or deploying infrastructure, you're typically doing it within a context or of an application or component of infrastructure already. So they've already got a boundary in terms of what it's used to and what a pipeline is going to action. Whereas when it comes to Terraform, you could be scaffolding out the entirety of your Azure cloud as an example, right? Or your entirety of a platform. And so that context is kind of like forgotten in the rush to build and do something fun with a new tool, which we all are guilty of, I'm sure, especially me. And so what I find is really important is to figure and have a bit of a design, not to the point where it's an application architecture type level of design, but actually thinking about, hang on, who's going to be using this? Who's going to be consuming this? How are we going to make sure that we're getting it right, or as right as we can the first time? And then where are the ones where we're actually going to accept some long-running states? One of the most common ones where I see long-running state that takes like 40 minutes is when someone set up GitHub repo management with Terraform, where they've got all the repositories being built by a single kind of Terraform flow, because it started with one team, then another team liked it, and then they all start doing it, and then they're all complaining why it takes 45 minutes to scan every repository to make another one. So you want to avoid that scenario. And I think actually having a look at what's the blast radius, to your point, Ned, like which teams are responsible for which points and which environments, probably the most crystal, way to go through and say, this is how I think we can break it up. But I think just as importantly as where you can break it up, also acknowledging that this one isn't going to be broken up and this one's going to take a while. And whether in the mercy of the providers, some more so than others, as you said, Ned, is really important. And I just think it's something that planning goes a long way, discussion goes a long way, who are you enabling it for goes a long way, especially if you're running that for a centralized team for those large companies.
Nice. I mean, that makes sense. And Lachie, it kind of calls back to the episode you did with me, planning it up front, thinking about as opposed to trying to build the car while you go, while entertaining to watch from afar, not entertaining to be on as a passenger. So Elif, what did you think of all that? Because you came in, you've got a lot of frontline experience with this as well. Based on what Ned said around, splitting up based on purpose, line of business, environment, kind of mirrors what you kind of said as well as planning up front. What are your thoughts on it now, having heard from them?
My thoughts are that I'm very happy I'm not the only one who kind of faced such issues. So we are comrades in battle, let's say. I hope at least I'm hoping to educate people to take a step back and plan in advance how to organize resources in terms of Terraform state management in advance. Because this, let's say, a half an hour discussion might alleviate a very painful headache later on. That's one of the things. And of course, don't look at the smaller pieces. Think about business units. That's a very, very good point in that head. Who will be responsible for managing what resources? What happens to shared resources? And also thinking a little about how our infrastructure is going to look like, let's say, in 2 years from now on. How much do we expect to scale? Because that would be also a factor in designing the state, or the states, better said.
I really like that point that you just made about planning out, because I feel like that's something we were really used to doing when we were in physical data centers, and we're like, I got to plan on how much capacity I actually need. But with the cloud, we got so used to infinite capacity. But that comes
Unlimited.
with its own challenges. And so maybe we need to plan out the physical, not even physical, sort of the. However, how can Terraform handle our architecture in 2 years if it continues to grow at this rate? Making those projections and planning for that instead of just trying to plan for what's in front of us right now.
Yeah,
So-
I totally agree. I was gonna say, like, you just got to think of it more so from the user's perspective as the product and what you want to experience, right? See, thanks for people throwing the YouTube comments in the chat from LinkedIn where it's not working, but like if I didn't think about how the games were going to play on that interesting arcade machine that someone's mentioned, in terms of how it worked, like some of the games might not work. They might not be spec'd correctly. They might not work in parallel. All of the design elements that you're not, thinking through are going to cause issues. So I just think you've got to plan it as well as you can upfront. Otherwise the adoption and the value of the platform becomes into question because, but that just takes forever, so there's no point. Or Terraform's a bad tool because I got to wait 50 minutes for it to run, which is not the case. It's actually the, resulting problem of an issue.
That's not an issue with the tool. The issue lies between the chair and the keyboard.
Yeah, it's the design.
the most
Yeah,
common
absolutely.
place.
The old layer 8 network problem.
I'm going to bring up a contentious topic, which is
Oh, yeah.
targeted applies and targeted plans, or skipping state refresh.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this is something that I've seen advocated on the good old LinkedIn. Some people advocating for just skipping the state refresh because that seems to take up a lot of time. And then other people making heavy use of the target argument to target only specific aspects of a much larger configuration. I'm curious to hear everyone's kind of opinions on that approach, pluses, minuses, hate it or love it. Elif, do you have an opinion?
Do we mix targeted with depends on? Because if so, it's painful. I did once a targeted apply because I was in a hurry. I wanted to spin up some resources very quickly, and I forgot there were certain depends-ons. I cannot say that this resulted in at least half a day of work for me to fix things up.
So Lachie, give us your take real quick, and then we're gonna answer a question from a user, and then we're gonna hit the next one. Yeah. Now you're definitely muted. Yeah, you muted yourself, Lachie.
Sorry, no, I had something else start playing randomly, which was just confusing me somewhere else. I don't know what was going on there. Sorry, I thought someone else was still talking. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty explicitly documented on the site. Like, I mean, don't use it for routine operations, right? It's an escape hatch, right? So that's kind of how I have always approached it. Otherwise, I find that if it's not just a break glass, it becomes part of core habit. And people find themselves in more trouble in state from skipping updates, causing inconsistencies because they've skipped it so many times. And then something I might touch on later in terms of module changes or things that are out of their control, they get inherited and it causes conflict there. So escape hatch only for me.
Nice. All right,
I totally agree with that.
Let's do a quick user question, and then we're gonna hop in the next topic. First up, quick shout out to Glenn Yu, one of our other ambassadors, who's been on our different episodes before.
Hi, Glenn.
Who's remanifested as a Lego person. It looks very different than the last time I saw you, Glenn. But the question here was, okay, so for infrastructure that's supposed to be long-lived, some of us might call it, mutable infrastructure. Is Terraform the best way? Right, so that is something, because if you're pure cloud native, you've probably bought into the whole idea of immutable infrastructure. You need to change, tear down the server, stand it back up, right? So what are y'all's thoughts on this? Here, in a pretty, and not a too quick of an answer. Don't feel rushed, but just so we can move on to the next one. But Elif, since this was your topic, would you start?
I was going to say that I love this question, to be honest. I'm going to answer with the following. It depends. What kind of resource do we mean by, let's say, long-lived resources? Is it a virtual machine? Amazing. Then we can use Packer with Ansible Provisioner, get a golden image, and spin up that golden image in any cloud provider we wish for, be it AWS, Azure, or whatever else. Is it a long-lived resource, let's say something like an on-premise database? That's a different topic because each resource type would be treated differently. Unfortunately, the answer is not very straight from my point of view because we can discuss about, let's say, networking resources, physical hardware, long-lived resources which are part of our infrastructure, especially that we can discuss about hybrid infrastructure types. We can discuss about long-lived resources within cloud, such as virtual machine or other resource types. Depending on our choice, we can have or we cannot have a state. We can also have HashiCorp Vault as a cluster installed within VMs, and we can use the same combination of Packer, Ansible, and getting an AMI to be able to spin up a cluster in like minutes.
Yeah, interesting. Elif, I've got maybe a more direct view. Ansible, like Red Hat, the Ansible installer, Red Hat for their installer of OpenShift and OpenStack under the covers uses Terraform. So it's pretty obvious from my point of view what they've chosen, and I don't know why I would differ from how they're doing it, right? So and that's before the acquisition and kind of unified tooling kind of approach. So for me, it comes down to more what's the common tool that's being used across infrastructure as a whole, and therefore where does it make sense, if at all, to have something different or not. If all of a sudden, because I've got one more permanent piece of infrastructure, does that mean I would change the tooling and approach I have to the thing I use the least often? It sounds kind of risky to me if everything else I'm doing is in Terraform. But you could also say, well, the opposite's true. It's different, so it should be unique, right? So there's kind of no really right answer. I guess the question is more, as there would be no state file from an Ansible point of view, true. But is that a good or a bad thing if you're not touching it very often and you want to make sure no one else has touched it because it shouldn't change for a long time also, right? So my answer, I'd always probably lean on Terraform because it's the first tool in my weaponry, my armory that I would lean into typically. But also reading from the vendor in terms of what they're doing in the UPI installer for OpenShift as an example, they use Terraform to build that too. Same with OpenStack.
On the other side, let's think about the fact that Ansible is meant for configuration management.
Yep.
So the use cases for Terraform and Ansible are different. And in my personal opinion, they should be used together. We can do configuration management with Terraform as well. Let's take, for example, Vault. We have a Vault provider, and we can configure a Vault cluster using Terraform. Should we do that or not? That's a different question. And we can debate whether we should use Ansible or Terraform for that, but I think we would extend a bit too much the topic.
Yeah, use them together but use them for what they're made for. Post-config for Ansible, infrastructure for Terraform. That's my view. Very black and white though, Ned. What about you?
I think, and I'll try to make this quick because I know that Cole wants to move on to the next thing. The long and short of it for me is your dev and test environments should mirror production, right? That's the whole point. And so if you're using two different tools to manage and define these two different environments, then you're leaving yourself open to like a lot of differences cropping up, and then things that worked in dev suddenly don't work in prod because you're not using the same configuration and the same tools. So I would say that you really should use the same tool across all these environments to ensure consistency and that things are done correctly throughout all of them. So when you test something, you know with some degree of confidence it's actually going to work in prod.
All right. Well, that was a good answer. Sorry if I looked zoned out, it wasn't because all of your wisdom is incredibly beautiful. It's because I was trying to debug our YouTube comments on the fly. Very, very fun. It's like, oh, how many cloud engineers does it take to figure out how to like moderate YouTube? It's like apparently infinite. So let's move on to the next topic here. Thanks for that. So on that topic, right, everyone's advice, hey, talk about it up front. A half-hour meeting can save you a lot of time. Don't build the car while you're writing on it. Ned's got some wonderful advice on how might you start with it. Purpose, line of business, environment, right? So a lot of good advice there. But our next topic, Ned, this was the one that you brought up. It's actually not necessarily Terraform centric, but what was it?
And see, that's everybody expects me to go with Terraform, and
100%.
I wanted to go left instead of right. So in this case,
I get it.
I have been thinking a lot about the advice that has been contained in trainings along how to integrate Vault with your applications and your architecture. And for a long time, the guidance was something along the lines of the ideal state is to add native, like program your applications to natively integrate with Vault. So actually make use of the Go library or the Python module or whatever it is, and put that right into your application. But every time I deliver trainings or talk to people who have implemented Vault, they never do that, ever. And so I started questioning that wisdom. And what a lot of them told me was, well, what if we move away from Vault? Now all of our applications are written specifically for this one tool. And it also puts the onus on the developer that they have to learn how to interact with Vault. Wouldn't it be better from a platform engineering perspective to just say, I just need you to look here for your secrets, and that's it. And I'll handle the details of implementation in the background. And once I got that feedback, I started thinking about it, and it does make more sense to me. But I'm curious, like if anybody else has had experiences integrating Vault into their applications and what approach they prefer. Lachie, do you have an opinion or an experience in that regard?
Yeah, very similar kind of questions. I won't call it resistance, just queries from, when you're trying to, hey, your company, we've rolled out this cloud platform, we've got HCP there, we've got Terraform Clouds building on the infrastructure, we're now at the app layer, we want you to consume these services, we've got Vault here, we've used Vault Radar, we've scanned some of your things, you've got some improvement to work on here, let's fix this, and you run them through the options, like you're saying, you got Golang, Python, which one, pick your weapon, and yeah, same queries. Why is that my responsibility? Why do I have to do that? Isn't that the security team's job? And you go through the whole security is everyone's responsibility, and they kind of go, oh, this, it's like compliance training all over again, right? And they're kind of not with it. And I found that one of the sticking points in adoption when we've had those conversations is they go, but that's so much more difficult for me to use than just the default cloud provider key vault, key value token like system,
Yep.
right? And essentially the conversation goes down a path of the harder that you make this for me to use, the less likely I am to adopt it. And so typically then if it's like a conversation where there's like, the CISO head of security in the room and they're taking like difficult with this amazing tool they're paid for, or like, and maybe no security, around keys, which is the current problem, or like they'll promise they all put it in a, Azure Key Vault as an example, that they're taking the Azure Key Vault discussion half the time, right? So I think for me, it's about how do you make it as easy, common sense to consumers as possible. And then if there's crown jewels type applications where you really want to double down and use some more of the advanced features that come with Vault holistically, then I would say you make that decision as the investment, right? And do something a little bit more unique there. But that's just how I've kind of justified it to myself in some of those conversations, which could be seen as the easy way potentially. But I think, leveraging the tool to get some value and easing into the maturity of the use of it is kind of how I found some value coming from that rather than resistance straight away.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And Elif, do you have any thoughts on Ned's wonderful topic he's laid the table here for?
This time I have a short answer. Totally applications, in my view, should be totally decoupled from Vault. and use certain integrations such as the Vault Secrets operator and others which are available there to retrieve secrets. And totally for Vault, especially for integration with the dynamic secrets engines. I'm very big fan of them, especially due to so many integrations available there, short-lived passwords, or even usernames if desired. So the advantages are numerous. Sky's the limit.
Mhm.
And back to you, Ned. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I landed as well. Is there's already some really good integrations that make things way easier for app developers to consume the secrets. Vault Agent, especially since the introduction of environment templates, along with just regular templates. So now you can start and stop processes and inject environment variables into those processes. That's huge because that's how a lot of applications pick up their secrets anyway. Or you could do the traditional file template where it writes it out to a file location. But now the agent's taking care of all that work. Or if you have an integration with something like Nomad that can inject vault secrets as part of the deployment process, again, the application doesn't need to know about it. So yeah, I totally agree, Elif, with your decouple the application from the secrets manager. And I guess that kind of goes broadly for any of the cloud key management solutions. You could have your app developer directly pulling stuff from AWS Secrets Manager or directly from Azure Key Vault, but what if you just simplify it for them and you just tell them, look for this environment variable, I'll make sure it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the right approach.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, to say that it's very funny to determine how a secret is retrieved from Vault. The authentication to Vault itself could be a very nice story.
Yeah.
I think, Glenn's beat me to it in the chat. It's a problem with having like super smart ambassadors in the chat. They say everything before you can get in because they've got their own messaging. But he's absolutely spot on. The kind of middle ground that I've led to is secret sync, right? In a lot of cases where you actually leverage, the ability to, you kind of, I don't know, almost admit defeat in saying that no one's going to use Vault properly. No one's going to go in and take advantage of these components. I think I'll meet them halfway. And to your point, and you as a service, you serve secrets as a service into the tooling that they're potentially more familiar with. That's easier to get them in the door. And then again, when the advanced, policies or use cases come through, you can kind of look at the people that want to take that, extra step. But obviously with Secret Sync, you still get the benefit of Vault's policies running through. It's just a different endpoint.
I think this fits the pattern of, well, everything we try to do in platform engineering anyways, right? From the different things everyone has said. We're trying to enable the developers, right? So when Lachie says, for ease of use, that all the developers, and raucous applause, like, yay, right? And Elif's like, decouple it, and all the application was like, yay, good patterns. And Ned's like, and here's how to do it. Here are the options, right? VSO, these different options. This way you don't have to change your application at all. They're like, yay, and they're still asking for more money. It is what it is. But on that front, that does afford, right, self-service and everything else like that. And it seems like some of the folks in the chat, like the previous question, oh, not that one. The previous person, but yes, nobody wants to rewrite, so agent and VSO are the go-tos. It makes perfect sense. Let's see here. Any other thoughts anyone had on those? Those are all really good takes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, since we're talking on abstractions to some extent, right? The developer, that is, we abstract the internal workings. Even though the authentication story into Vault, Elif, as you mentioned, would be wonderful. If I'm a software developer, I don't want to write that story in my app, right? Yep. So, like, please. But that brings us out to our third topic. Lachie, this was yours, and I cannot wait to hear the rant. But yes. Tell us.
The rant? I might keep the rant. We might not go too crazy on the rant. It is still like 7 a.m, so maybe we'll keep the rant. But Ned did a great job teeing us up for that kind of like platform versus product mindset conversation with Vault. Like, what are you forcing people to do? Is it they're give them a platform or force them to use a product in some ways, which is not what that typically is spoken about as a mindset. But I think That plus with what Elif was talking about, I was thinking about what can I talk about? And one of the really big problems I've had in Terraform, I'm going to stick with Terraform, which is, I guess, I'm not deviating from brand here, Ned, is on module lifecycle, right? And the management of kind of those components. So, a lot of people, was a question before around, do you have to use modules? When should you use modules is probably the number one question that we probably all get asked. Like, when do you use a module? Or is it too late to use a module now? Or, have I abstracted modules too much in this repository because thou shalt not deploy anything if it's not a module, right? And it's always been a debate, but then the kind of unsung problem that's always emerged when people adopt this from a platform point of view is like, how do you actually lifecycle those things? How do you manage those things? There's no, especially in a Terraform cloud, point of view, and open, using the open source community editions, it's even more difficult. But you've got a registry when you're talking about, TFC on HTTP. So how do I tell or instruct people that this isn't supported anymore? This doesn't work anymore, right? And so obviously there was some awesome announcements where it's gone GA, but we've now got the ability to revoke modules from the registry, which is actually doesn't work the way you think it would, which is why I wanted to bring it up, right? So you've always had the ability to mark something as deprecated. You can deprecate a module in your registry, which essentially puts a warning in the terminal or in the console UI where it says, hey, this is deprecated, warning, whatever. I think we've all used packages where the first time we run something, there's a yellow warning and it goes too fast, and we go, that's a problem for later. let's keep going on with what we need. And I was really hopeful that the revocation feature was going to solve that problem by blocking the run, but before it, executes, or to, have an additional approval from the module owner or some other kind of workflow. It's kind of half there. What it does at the moment is it will block new users of the module, but those that have already got it in state will just continue to get the warning. And instead of being saying it's deprecated, it will say it's revoked, but you can still use it. And so I think it's a good first step in the kind of solution to the kind of day two of lifecycle management. But I was really wondering how have either of you and Cole, because Cole solves problems too, come up with sometimes have you come up with ways in which you can solve the kind of day two problem of the kind of like, I've abstracted too far, or I've got no way to actually manage these modules because they come like virtual machines that no one wants to patch after a while, right? They're too far gone to save type, model, right? I'll open it up. Have you come into this problem? Have you solved this problem? Do you think this new feature fixes it? What are the thoughts?
Elif, you want to start?
Yeah, I was thinking about the multitude of the questions and what use cases I've had in my experience. And if I may add, another interesting question would be whether we want to use community developed modules or develop our own.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's also something interesting. I've noticed that community developed modules are very large, contain a lot of resources. Their level of complexity is difficult to understand. I personally needed quite some time to be able to reconstruct the logic of the author and to understand what's there. I understand the purpose. The purpose is to be able to cover as many use cases as possible. However, this resulted for me in a complexity which is difficult to maintain and manage at times. And we get to the point how many resources we want to manage in a module, how complex should the module be. At least I think it's reasonable to say if we use a certain resource frequently enough, that should turn into a module. Having two databases using, let's say, linear Terraform code isn't explanatory for developing a module. There are just two resources. I don't expect this to go higher than that, and that's it. It doesn't make sense. But in case we have 100 EKS clusters, then yeah, for sure, using a module would definitely be useful. And as a practice in terms of releasing modules, what I've noticed to work for myself and the teams I've been working with is using semantic versioning and releasing modules based on tags. What a common approach, however, is for everyone in the team to use properly the semantic versioning, because it's very easy to deviate from that one. So it's a, let's say, a gentleman's agreement within the team that everyone is going to stick to a certain process to make everyone's lives a bit easier.
Nice, nice. I mean, yeah, that's so first up, I like that pattern. If you see a pattern of resources used enough, probably modularize it for, while putting on tags like, Ned's new version, or like Elif's even newer version, or Lachie's newest version, thus there shall be no more versions newer than that, are funny. Semantic versioning, it's there for a reason. So doing that is it. But Ned, what about you? Tons of modules. How do you manage them? How do you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo Elif's point about community modules and how they do rapidly become extremely complex and full of convoluted logic. And that's not the fault of the people maintaining the modules. They're trying to solve for a broad set of use cases. It's kind of like there's that old adage that 90% of the features in Word only get used by like 10% of the users, or something along those lines. Or is it 90% of people only use 10% of the features in Word, but everybody uses a different 10% because everybody has their own edge case. And that's kind of what you end up with these community modules. So I think those are trying to solve broad use cases. When you're developing your modules internally, you should be aiming to solve very specific use cases, and your module should accommodate 80% of that use case. So that's a like Pareto principle of 80-20. The other 20% you can solve through just actually writing out the resources or having custom modules for those like weird edge cases. But then having one main module that enshrines your best practices, is targeted for specific use cases. And in that way, you can push back to avoid sprawl. You can say, this is the scope of this module. Oh, you want me to add this other new resource? That doesn't make sense. I'm going to push back and say that doesn't go in this module. So I think that really helps you maintain the usability. And I guess the other thing about modules is so much has been added to how we can, validate inputs and how we can expose different outputs. But trying to think of other module management issues that I've run into. I guess the versioning thing, I have not run into as much of actually having to fully deprecate a module, as opposed to deprecating older versions of the module. That's something I would like to see more better and more support for, is if you're on version 1 of it and version 2.5 is the newest, and we want to deprecate and nullify the use of version 1, get it to the point where if somebody's still using version 1, it kind of stops working at a certain point or stops reevaluating a plan and really forces you to jump to the next version. That I would definitely like to see, because the reason you publish new versions is because you have new best practices, you have new ways of doing things. You want to use a newer version of the provider that has new features. Yeah, I want you to use the newer version of the module. And most people, at least the advice I give them, is to hard code their versions of their modules, because there's no module lock file. And because of that, they only upgrade when they absolutely need something. So giving them that little extra nudge might actually be helpful.
100%.
Yeah, so those are my big things.
That's what this like module lifecycle, it's for the versions of modules. So that's kind of why I was like, oh my god, this is the thing that it just warns them if they're using it still. It stops new, which is good that it stops new, but that functionality coming through to the people that are still using it in a non-destructive way, obviously, would be great. But something that stops it to continue to execute, would be preferential. Because if you've got security controls that now the company's now mandated to do in your module is the point of enforcement for infrastructure security. You've got no way but like begging, like, please update.
Well,
I'll raise the pull request for you. Like, there's nothing else to do, right?
I'm curious what your thoughts would be about enforcing this using policy as code. So setting minimum module requirements in your policy as code, whether that's Sentinel or OPA, and enforcing it that way. So the plan literally can't run, or the plan can run, but the apply literally can't run because you're violating the policy of the module version. It's a very blunt tool, but it would absolutely work.
That's what we did. That's actually what we did. Yeah. So we actually, this was before OPA was there. And so we went, this is early days of Sentinel in Terraform Enterprise. And that's exactly what we did. But then, you know, where I was working there, we had 3,000 workspaces, 250 Azure subscriptions. We had modules on modules on modules. It became such an overhead to manage the policy and the modules, and you know, like it just became this. It was just like almost another problem. It was another kind of like, the state file's too long type issue, where it's just like Terraform's not suitable because the investment in operations is so large that it's taking away from the value of building it, right? Which when you go, oh no, that's not. It's not the tool. It's not the tool. That's not, you know, it's not what it is. So I agree. It's a great fix for the problem, but if the scale is something that's a concern, then it can become quite the overhead to almost keep a ledger of what's approved and what's not, and where your edge cases might be, and that you've got to manage that. You know, what I think, if they've got 80% of that feature there, if we just extended it that little bit, I could get rid of having to use, policy as the stick for the carrot, essentially, as well, which is and I think I've got kind of two rules when it comes to build or should not build modules, which I try to stick to, which is that a module should reduce complexity. That's like number one. So if it's not reducing the end user's ability to do something complex, you shouldn't use it, right? The second rule for the build sounds really simple. But the amount of times I've almost flipped the table because I've seen a module that breaks this rule is unreal. And that rule is simply that if a module only has one resource in it, don't. Like just don't. I've actually worked somewhere where they had a module for an Azure resource group, didn't do anything else. It just built a resource group, and I was like, why? Why have we done this? And the rule was everything must be a module. So of course it had to be a resource group, right? And you're like, this is common sense must prevail here at some point. And the should not build, right, is if it's just a simple wrapper, right? So if you're just wrapping something really simple, like for a load balancer where the config's always different, or an Azure storage account where it's always different, that's how I find you get into those community module traps when where you've got, I'm going to build a module for an Azure storage account and it's going to be able to do blobs, tables, queues, everything, and you go, maybe you should do a module further down that not for everything all at once. And if a module's purpose, and this is the kind of number one rule, if a module's purpose is purely to be consumed by another higher level module, it doesn't need to be a module, right? So if that's the only reason it exists, right, is to be consumed by another module, then a resource is probably the better choice. They're kind of my two sanity checks.
Nice.
Microsoft's Azure Verified Modules team would have some fighting words for you.
I know those guys. I mean, I work at a Microsoft-only partner. I come into this a lot. And Matt White, who's not related to me at all, and these guys, they do a fantastic job. But yeah, it's something that we raise and talk every now and then to them about every now and then. Lachie table, but no one wants to see a Lachie table.
I'd pay for that too.
Well, HashiCorp this year, no.
All right.
We did a book signing last year, but this year I'll flip
the table. Yeah. All right. So because we need to be conscientious of time, this is actually pointed out that at some point we should probably do a follow-up or some separate thing where we address modules in general, because there's a lot of questions around those, right? When you're getting started, community or internal? And if so, how do you build them? What should go in them? And when you start building them, are you going to make Lachie flip a table? I don't know. There's the check. There's like 3 laws for that, right?
I should never have said this.
But then there's also the next topics of what happens when you have hundreds? How do you converge people, right? Ned, when you're talking about deprecating like a full module, how do you deal with that? Because the more mature the ecosystem gets, the more those are going to be out there. But let's move on to the newer stuff in place. In fact, one of the first, let's go. So we're going to go through some of the new things that are happening in the ecosystem. All announced at Hashi Days recently. Elif, you actually brought up one that's even more power to the coders. It's an entire new block in the actual language. So would you introduce that for us?
I'm sticking with Terraform this time, simply because I had a talk in February about Terraform ephemeral input values, output values, and the very first glimpse of ephemeral resources. So hopefully many of you already started using those because these are very, very powerful. The gist of it, we are able, using these ephemeral input and output values and ephemeral resources, not to persist sensitive data within Terraform state and during the plan and apply operations. This is the gist of it. However, there was, let's say, a small limitation to this, because these values were used and then poof, completely disappeared. What happened when we want, for example, to set a password, let's say, for an RDS database upon its creation? Using or creating the database in the classical approach, that password would end up in the Terraform state. This is the moment when it comes into place the idea of read-only arguments, when we are able to reference ephemeral values into non-ephemeral resources. It is, let's say, more like a storytelling explained. I've chosen this subject in particular because I loved it when I heard about it in the winter, and I know I was discussing with Cole and I was analyzing the AWS SSM parameter PR, which was not released, and included in my presentation a code snippet, which was definitely not going to work until that PR would be merged. And now I'm happy to see it merged. Hopefully my code block would work now. Should you see the presentation back? So it was kind of a personal debt to continue the subject.
Yeah, that was a really great talk, and what a fun thing to add for coders to do even more. And I will say, and Ned, I want your take on these afterwards. It was interesting to present the feature because at first you have to like tell people it's like, yeah, the sensitive equals true, and the password it's in state. Like it's encrypted at rest, it's encrypted at transit, but like it's still in there, and some of you just figured that out, right? So Ned, what do you think about ephemeral resources?
I mean, this is this thing that I've been talking about forever, the fact that sensitive information ends up in state. And up until now, there has not been a great way to avoid it other than transporting your secrets entirely outside of Terraform, which could be very difficult to do. And ephemeral resources and values, when they first came out, were really only good for providers initially, because if you tried to use them with regular resources, like Elif said, it would reject them because you could only assign ephemeral values to things that weren't going to get written to state. And all the attributes of a resource get written to state. And so it was really the introduction of write-only arguments that closed that loop and said, all right, now we have this option for you to specify an ephemeral value inside of a regular resource block, and that will not get written to state. And I've tested it out, works great. The only thing that it's going to take is that every resource type that needs to support it, that you want to support it, is going to have to get updated with this new argument, this write-only argument, and a write-only version argument to go with it. So it's going to take time for the various resource providers to get themselves updated and have those arguments available. I want to call out Stu Mace. He has an awesome blog post about AZ API, which has gone a different way because of the uniqueness of AZ API. You can specify ephemeral values in a sensitive body portion of the AZ API resource. And that means basically any Azure resource that you want to use ephemeral values with, you can do it through the AZ API provider. No updating of the provider necessary. So if that's of interest, definitely check that out and just search Stu Mace. The blog post is excellent.
Wow, nice. Yeah, for sure. I will definitely check that out. But what about you, Lachie? You're up next, man. How do you feel about that so much of this so far has just been discipline? Like, hey, just make sure it's not in there, right? What do you think about the new resource?
Yeah, I mean, one, like Elif and Ned, we've been waiting for something like this for a long time. It's always like you were saying, Cole, like the second question, like, what about yeah, and then the state doesn't, but then I could still get and then you're just 4 questions away from just down a rabbit hole that matters, but there's no graceful answer. I think it's great to see that the thinking around Hashi moving from like just not like long-lived environment, but like permanent infrastructure to something more temporary is great, right? And coming up with a way to deal with that gracefully, because originally it was an edge case, but as the use of the tool has expanded into more platforms, this really helps solve a lot of those cases that now become quite mainstream. And I think the acknowledgement of that helps us to see that it's not just the infrastructure tool anymore. It's kind of a bit of a shift in terms of how this is kind of working, which is fantastic. So yeah, ability, short-lived validation, test harnesses, like now all those things we can do it in a much more like graceful way.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, so just to make sure we hit all of the announcements that we wanted to go through, let's go ahead and hit the next one, Lachie. This was Waypoint Actions, right? Tell us about it.
Yeah. I'm changing from Terraform. I couldn't resist it. I gotta do something. I know who else. I'm going to change the mug behind me and everything now. No, so Waypoint and Orlando kind of put something in the chat earlier about like, hey, is anyone looking at integrating these like IDPs with Backstage or Atlassian Compass and Waypoint and all these things? I had a great session with the product group on Waypoint earlier in the month about feedback and future direction, and I'm super excited for that as a product and what it can do. But the first step on that journey was that Actions had to become GA, and they have at HashiDays, which is fantastic, right? So we finally got Actions GA, which is great, which really starts to help us see what the next kind of wave of where Waypoint's going to go is. So for those that haven't used it, Waypoint's a great way if you're trying to empower your developer community to get them out of Terraform, right? And that's ingest a little bit because early on in the Terraform stories, whenever you were trying to get people to write infrastructure as code, you'd go to the developers and say, hey, I made these modules, I'm meeting you, I'm not in the GUI, we're using code. And they go, oh, infrastructure, I don't want to do that with code. Like, that's your job, right? It's like the security problem with Vault, right? That's your thing, right? And now we're kind of saying, hey, we think that there's an even better way we can make this simpler. Waypoint uses the no-code modules from Terraform Cloud and creates those as templates. Now you don't even have to write the code. Isn't that great? You don't have to do that anymore. And they're, well, no, but hang on, I kind of like the code now. Like, I'm kind of used to that. That's kind of cool. I get to change these things. And we're like, no, we can make it faster, better, more standardized, appeal to a different audience. But the question that always came up in that scenario was, well, but then how do I do the common thing I've always got that comes after it? Like, how do I clear that cache? How do I redo that environment? How do I do these actions on the templates from Waypoint, right? And so getting that GA, I think, it's been a huge amount of work, and I think it helps really kind of help us define the personas and where they fit in using the templates in terms of enabling developers and the kind of IDP journey. I can't wait to see how that expands potentially in other directions and what's available potentially for things that have nothing to do with Terraform at all. Crazy. That would be really cool. So yeah, a huge announcement for me, one I've already started using, got a lot of clients now actually interested in adopting the service because it is GA, and that's like really where value is, and we can get some people kind of using it in anger and kind of scaling it, and that's really exciting. And I think there was a lot of people in conversations, or I was doing talks at user groups where they were saying, oh, but I want to roll out like Backstage, but I really only have Terraform as a use case to start with. And then you say, oh, you do know, like, if you just make those no-code modules, Waypoint can do that, like, automatically, right? And they're like, oh, I didn't even, what's Waypoint, right? And so now we've got this ability to go and kind of action that and then add more features. So it's fantastic.
So I have two things. First up, Lachie, when you're saying like actions and templates, if you would have winked when you did that, that would have.
I kind of,
Yeah.
you know,
And then the second, did you say using them angrily? What did you say?
using an anger.
Using an anger, yeah. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Is that an Australian thing?
No, that's
No?
that's a
Okay.
US thing
All right.
too.
Okay,
So,
good. Sure. Okay.
Elif, what are your thoughts on actions?
I was going that this man should be selling Waypoint, and I'm not giving up Terraform, to be honest.
I would sell anything.
So that was the whole time. Waypoint does this, Waypoint does that, and I was like, I like Terraform.
Yeah.
I still like it.
That's the
So
best
you
part.
are telling me that I should replace Terraform with Waypoint.
No, I'm not saying you should replace it. I'm saying that other people can use your amazing Terraform now without having to learn it. That's the cool part. We can scale it. We can get it in front of people that are not, as competent in Terraform as you, that don't have all of those capabilities, that maybe coding's not, or maybe you've got infrastructure colleagues who haven't learnt, Terraform yet, but they kind of got to dip their toe in the water, but still want the speed and value. That was selling a little bit there, Elif. I'm going to a little bit, but it's just a little bit. But that's the benefit now, is the people that are absolutely, weapon grade at Terraform can now scale the way that uses without having to kind of bring everyone on that same journey in terms of becoming. And you can kind of look at, okay, my modules don't have to be as complicated because I can serve them this way. I don't have to put in as much logic because I can guide people to the UI this way, things like that. The evolution of the forms that we have for no-code modules in TFC, which is great.
So that's my question to you, Elif, in terms of like creating a platform for your app developers so that you can, what was the quote here? Empower your dev community by getting them out of Terraform. I really liked that one because it's.
I don't know. That's I don't know if that's
right. So is that something that you would aim towards, or do you think every dev should learn Terraform? Anyways, what's your take?
I am in between a bit. I do think there is, let's say, a huge gap between development teams and infrastructure. One of the ideas I'm heavily advocating for is to close this gap. Whenever development teams try to get a basic understanding of what infrastructure does, be it, okay, I've heard about Terraform, I might know at least a bit what it does, I have a slight idea. And the moment when infrastructure try to understand their workflows, their needs, their pain points, and the fact that we need to work together and not against each other, that would be the ideal use case for myself. So no, I wouldn't like to get them out of Terraform. I would like them to know a bit what's under the hood and what's happening a bit under the hood, because they should also be able to do some basic troubleshooting by themselves. And in case no one knows or didn't touch the Terraform CLI or has no clue what a refresh is or what a plan is, or what a destroy could do, or what changing the slide attribute is going to result in, that could go very, very wrong.
I mean, that's spoken like an engineer, right? The more you know of the full stack, the better you are at any given piece of it, certainly. Ned, just for time here, let's go and what are your thoughts on Waypoint Actions?
Yeah, I haven't used Waypoint, so I don't have any strong opinions on its features. It's one of those things that when Waypoint was initially released, back when Boundary was brand new also, it wasn't the thing that I glommed onto. And then at last year's HashiCorp, I was convinced that I need to take a look at it, but it's been on the backlog. So maybe I need to bump it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair. It's Lachie's. You are kind of like the ultimate salesman for it in a good way. No, because there are, for every developer, even though I would like every developer to understand the full stack so that they can quit bothering me, some of them don't want to. Some of them just want a button and they just want to stay focused on the software code. They are a Golang developer. That's what they want to do. And the minute you show them Terraform, they're like, I don't want to touch it, right? So
yeah, because I agree with. I mean, I would prefer everyone to understand Terraform and understand how it all works. But the reality is, in large environments, that's quite difficult. And a lot of the businesses that we work with, all of us, that is, not me, all of us, they don't make money by understanding Terraform. They make money by not building infrastructure. They make money by providing a service. So any way in which you can make that faster, increase that time to value, sometimes that comes at the cost of technical purity. There's a quote that you can use in your
Technical purity.
Technical purity.
Okay. All right. So we've got one more. Well, actually, maybe two, because one of them's a fun one, but probably the bigger one, Ned, that you wanted to talk about was Vault Radar. So, if you would, good sir.
Yeah, I mean, Vault Radar is a service that deals with the problem of the fact that you already have secrets stashed all over your organization. And how do you find them and bring them under centralized management? And so, like, the very first step in that is always visibility. Like, if I don't know that those secrets are out there and where they're being stored, how can I have any hope of centralizing them and putting some governance around them? And that's part of what Vault Radar does, is it has the ability to scan your code, scan your environment, find those credentials or those secrets that have been checked into source control or in various other places, alert you to their existence and help you remediate that, and then go from there to start centralizing where your secrets are stored, whether that's Vault or using something else. So I just think that's, as someone who has checked in secrets into source control on more than one occasion by accident, I can appreciate that the solution is there to help me with that. And the fact that there is now an agent that will allow you to scan internal locations as well as SaaS offerings, that makes it that much more powerful. So if you have an internal, set of Git repositories or something like that, you can include that in the radar scanning. And it isn't just, secrets and credentials. It can also scan for PII. So making sure that no one's accidentally checking in all of the credit card numbers or something along those lines. Yeah, I don't know. It's a solution that makes perfect sense and marries really nicely into that evolution of, getting your arms around secrets security and moving to a more like governed and centralized solution for your secrets management.
Yeah, and it just went GA, right? And what's funny is, Ned, when you first brought up the Vault thing earlier, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to go left, right? And I assume that was a play on the shift left words, right?
A little bit.
But this is something that's like, well, after the fact, right? So Elif, I'm going to plug you next with your thoughts on this. You've got secrets all over the place. You have a state of your infrastructure as it is. There's probably stuff all over the place. But what do you think about Vault Radar in context of anything and everything you do?
Let the secrets go wild. Compromising or having secrets compromised is always a pain point. And what I'm impressed a lot is that for the past year, we've seen huge advancements in terms of security, be it improvements, be it new products or complementary products that they do, because I feel Radar is a complementary product to Vault. It's impressive, and these are actual pain points in industry. I feel our infrastructures have grown to be quite mature nowadays, and it's time for us to focus on things such as security. Nonetheless, to say the emergence of AI might impose additional security concerns. That's also a possibility. So using Radar, a huge yes. Safeguarding our data, again, huge yes.
Yeah, I mean, I like since we're probably not going to get time to go into the AI doomsday scenarios, given the copious amounts of stuff it generates on average.
That was for Ned, actually. Yeah. That was for Ned.
Yeah, it can scan even, that makes even more sense. But Lachie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was really hoping Elif was going to continue on the kind of narrative that let him run wild, and I was just going to watch it's like this. Whoa, hang on, this is an interesting way to go. But No, it was. I had a good chuckle. I think the kind of thing that I love is you never knew how bad the problem was, right? So whenever you were going in and saying, "Hey, Vault's going to solve this problem," you're like, "Well, how do you know we have secret sprawl?" It's like, come on, like, what? You're the only org ever that doesn't have any secret sprawl, never accidentally committed something in Git history, and so you would convince an organization or convince like where you're working to go in and use this and take secrets seriously. And then the security engineering team, the kind of like unsung heroes of like most organizations, are there in truffle hog and like looking at Git logs and the graph and seeing it, trying to figure out where these things are and what they need to do, right? It's a complicated problem, right? Whereas now, before you even have to go down that route, you can understand how big the problem is, where the kind of maybe biggest areas of concern are, where the risks lie, and how that works. And I think the key thing for me is the value that it unlocks is Vault, was kind of said, it's kind of shifting left into that kind of security space, like DevSecOps. You got your secrets management tool. We're kind of like above it, not in it. This pulls it right into it, So now in your actual DevSecOps kind of capability, you've got a way to interrogate, scan, kind of make that an integral part of the way in which you're doing things by ensuring that there's a check, rather than going through and trying to do that post when it's already too late. It's already in the wild. You've got to rotate these things as well. So I think that's the really kind of cool thing for me, is it's kind of bringing that integration up. We're not kind of like chasing ghosts anymore about these like mythical secrets we've heard about being sprawled everywhere. We can kind of actually really zoom in on where we know they are, because we've found that, and it kind of helps us see the problem more so than kind of like chase our tails and not know when we've made an impact or solved it.
Nice. Now wrap us back up here with your thoughts on what both Elif and Lachie said here, in combination with another good plug from Glenn here about you being Vault Ned.
I forgot about that video. That was fun. I still have the
coming to
token.
it now. No. Oh.
Yeah. Of course, I have it right on my desk.
Yeah.
Yeah, great points all. And the thing I maybe neglected to highlight is the ability to find leaked secrets. So maybe that was secure at some point, and then somebody accidentally committed or leaked it, and now you have a problem. You can go back and revoke that secret, and now you can leverage the fact you've deployed Vault or something similar to easily roll that secret or that private key or whatever it is. So you need to have that automation in place to deal with the scope of the issue. But yeah, if you don't know how big the issue actually is in your environment, you have no idea how many resources you need to put forward to fighting it. And part of what Radar will show you is the severity of the different things it's found. So you can kind of get an idea for where you should start your remediation, as opposed to just seeing 10,000 alerts and being like, I don't know, we can't deal with this.
Yeah. I mean, it's the new world. What do we generate? Like 30 million lines of net new code, the world's code base per day or something like that. It's quite
more than that with AI.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of dark, terrible secrets, mostly committed by the 3 people on the stream, not including me. Thank you very much. Hey. But we have gone quite a bit.
The captain goes down with the ship, throws everyone else over. But what happens to that?
We have gone quite a bit over, and I know for Elif it's like 1:13 in the morning. So thank you for staying on. I'm gonna ask two last things before I close you all out here. Number one, everyone give me your hot take. We're not gonna get to go into it, but everyone give me your one hot take, just quick, and then what you want them to go check out, or I think we call it call to action when we put it in a document, but whatever you would like people to know. And let's go how we did intros here. Lachie, give us your hot take and what you want people to go do.
Hot take. What do I got? I'm going to lean into what Elif said I was doing, selling Waypoint. Give it a go. Go see what it can do. Go explore the opportunity there. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's not for everyone. Maybe you're all diehard Terraform people like me. But I would give it a go, because I think what it can do and help people do and demystify infrastructure for some people, very, very valuable. I got a website, lockandlight.com. Check it out. LinkedIn, normal things.
Normal things. I like that. Okay. Elif, your hot take and what you want people to check out.
Open a browser, Google Terraform EKS cluster, find the very first module you come up with on GitHub, and start analyzing it and stripping it down and see and ponder whether the complexity is actually necessary or not. It's more about reflection. And it could be anything. So EKS was just an idea I had. Could be something from Azure, Space, Google, whatever. But pick up a community model and strip it down from all the complexity.
Oh, nice. Ned?
Oh, geez, these were good ones. I was going to say something about AI.
Do it.
I was trying not to. You do it. Do it.
It's just wholly unavoidable. I think, contrary to what a lot of naysayers are saying, I think AI is going to force us to be more deliberate and thoughtful about how we communicate and plan things out. Because while it is very good at generating mountains and mountains of HCL, it is not particularly good at understanding context or intent. So if you want your code to be quality and do what you actually expect it to do, you need to be able to communicate effectively. So God, maybe my 10th grade English teacher was right.
No.
No!
I should have read Shakespeare. No.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you all. There is one more hot take here that Glenn threw into the chat, and I agree with this hot
I
take.
fully endorse.
Yeah. Elif, do you agree?
No.
I literally was.
It's always one. Fair enough.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. These are our HashiCorp Ambassadors Roundtable and discussion of good, big topics, some of which probably deserve their own episode, some of the new announcements from Hashi Days, and then some good hot takes here at the end. I'm sure if you haven't seen them before, we have a thought leader series with all of our ambassadors. Lachie's got a great one in terms of the Hitchhiker's Guide to Cloud Maturity, and Ned has one where we walk through a lot of AI topics as well. He clickbaited named the heck out of it. It was great. Armand was actually on there with us. It was great. And Elif doesn't know it yet, but I'm about to ask her to come on and do an episode as well. So thank you everyone so much, everyone, for joining us. This is going to be released onto YouTube after the fact. And until we see you all again, see you next time.